All right.
Today we're going to be discussing Erikson's theories of psychosocial development. Now, in order to understand Erikson's theories, we must first look at Erikson himself. Erikson is born in 1902 near Frankfurt, Germany. As he grows up, he begins to study art. But then, by 1927, he becomes an art teacher at a psychoanalytically enlightened school. The school that he worked for really focused on psychological development and psychoanalyzing their students. Actually, most of Erikson's theories, especially the one we're going to be discussing today on psychosocial development, developed from intense observation of his students. This enlightened school was actually founded by Anna Freud in Vienna, and a lot of Erikson's theories actually relate to Freud on some level. His best-known work is what we'll be looking at today. It is this 8-stage theory about psychosocial development, where Erikson argues that in 8 stages, we all face a conflict, a major conflict, of which the result affects how we continue development. Each person, according to Erikson, will go through all 8 stages over the course of their life. Now, this relates to a psychological struggle, each stage. This psychological struggle contributes to a major aspect of a person's personality. The result of the major conflict will be what determines how a person develops and how a person acts moving forward. Erikson believed that this theory was universal and could be applied across the board and could be applied to every person regardless of cultural background, regardless of religious experiences over the course of their lives. Some of Erikson's detractors actually use that to argue against Erikson, stating that how can you claim this is universal without taking culture into effect? But Erikson argues that because it is rooted in the stages of development, it can be considered a universal theory. Now, we're going to begin with an activity to look at some of those overlapping elements. Each of you should divide a large piece of paper into 3 parts. The first part should indicate and be labeled past. The second indicate present, and the third write future. Now, as you look at your paper, focus on each block. Within each block, you need to write down or draw images that come to your mind, words, key terms, key phrases, experiences you've had, images that come to your mind, and draw them in each of these boxes. This deals specifically with your past, your present, your future. You are telling your story here. We have to see, or we want to see, what are the most important elements that stand out of your life. And I actually have an example here. Now, as we look at our piece of paper, and we look at our boxes, under Erikson's theory, each of us should have similar things or similar actions taking place in each box. In your past, depending on your age, it might be your interaction with your parents. It might have to do with your family structure, your family life. It might have to do with your early experiences with food or being provided food. It might have to do with making friends, that early social stage of early schooling. As you get towards the present, you begin to look more at your work, your love life, those relationships, how you interact with society. And then for the future, we could see terms like your legacy. What are you leaving behind? What are you going to share with the rest of the world? Now, based on Erikson's theory, all 3 of our boxes should tell a similar story. There should be overlapping theories, overlapping ideas. Those ideas are rooted on these 8 stages. Erikson labeled them based on age, and you start with the basic conflict of trust and mistrust, and we'll go into these in a little more detail shortly. As you move up the ladder, not only are you growing in age, growing in maturity, you're also having the conflicts become ever more complex. They're not as cut and dry as trust versus mistrust. Do you trust somebody? Do you have faith in them to provide, or do you not? As we move up into intimacy, what levels of intimacy are we talking about? What type of isolation? If you have a job, are you isolated? The complexity begins to grow as we get older and affects interaction on different, more complex levels. The first stage of development deals with trust versus mistrust, and deals specifically with infants. At this stage, babies learn that they must trust their parents to provide their basic needs. If a child's basic needs are not met at this stage, it is believed that that child will grow up with a certain level of doubt or mistrust in the world. The second stage looks at toddlers, autonomy versus shame and doubt. As toddlers develop, they begin to take on certain things that they do on their own, autonomously. If a child is not encouraged properly at this stage, it is believed that they will develop a level of shame or doubt in their abilities. The third stage deals with preschoolers and talks about initiative versus guilt. The idea that as a preschooler moves into this stage, they're going to attempt to do more things without direction. Not only are they doing them independently or alone, but they are doing them of their own initiative. If, again, they are not properly encouraged to complete these tasks on their own and to take that initiative, it is believed a child will develop a level of guilt about whether or not they can accomplish a task. As they move into stage 4, which is a large portion of your school years, between the ages of 7 and 12, you begin to develop this self-confidence through learning new things. If you are not encouraged or praised properly for your learning, you may develop what's called an inferiority complex. The idea that you are not as good as your peers or not as good as those people around you. Stage 5 deals with identity and role confusion. This looks at your teenage years from 13 to 19. It is believed that children start to care more about how they look to others, how they look to their peers, and form their own identity by experimenting with who they are. If they're unable to properly develop their own identity at this age, they will have an issue about what their role is as they move into adulthood. Your last 3 stages deal with adulthood, starting with the ages of about 20 and moving into 65. Stage 6 looks at the development of intimacy and deals with young adulthood until about 34. It is believed during this stage people fall in love, get married, and start building their own family. However, if they don't develop this intimacy, they'll begin to fall further into this level of isolation. They will feel isolated from society. Stage 7, generativity versus stagnation, focuses on the ages 35 to 65 and talks about this period of human life in which people are usually working, contributing to society, giving of themselves. It is believed that if people do not do this during this time period, they do not give or contribute or feel they are doing so, they will begin to develop feelings of stagnation, as if they're not moving forward, they're not progressing. The final stage deals with integrity or despair and looks at adults over the age of 65. It is believed that adults over the age of 65 must be able to look back on their lives fondly and feel as if they have done good works. If they do not feel that, if they reflect on their lives and feel poorly or negativity, they will begin to descend into a period of despair. Now, to pull in my own personal classroom experiences, I'd like to move into a discussion of Erikson and how it applies in the classroom. This is based loosely on one of my personal students. He's a 14-year-old 7th grader and has recently been referred to the school psychologist because of concerns of both academic performance as well as behavior. When looking back on his school records, we see he was retained, and most of his elementary school grades were satisfactory or needs improvement. His current teachers are unsure of his academic skills because typically he does not turn in assignments. In class, he clowns around, he's the class clown, and he also seems to not take assignments seriously. Now, if we look at Erikson, and we ask which stage of development could have generated this issue. Looking at Erikson, we see there are a number of places where we could have developed this sort of conflict. It could be developed because of his feelings of inferiority, because of his low grades, his ends. It could also be that he is working to develop his own personality. So is it a thing of role confusion? So I pose the question to you. At which stage of development could these issues that we are seeing with Jason have developed? Now, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th stages can be greatly influenced by education. It is at this point, the preschool, elementary, and secondary level, that teachers become active participants in the development of their students. There are a number of activities that teachers can undertake that ensure they contribute under Erikson, by Erikson, to correct psychosocial development. Teachers are very important in terms of praise, encouragement, and if they are not giving these proper opportunities for development, they can hinder a student's psychosocial development later on down the road. For example, activities that can be done in the classroom that take on a mind of their own and take on that feel of how Erikson would approach it could be in preschool, for example. Let children be in charge of the learning process. When participating in a classroom project, this will allow the teacher to see what areas interest their students. Kind of let them take the lead and see what they find interesting about a particular topic. In elementary, provide a variety of choices. Make an assignment that students can express themselves. Rather than using traditional assessments, such as a test, look for opportunities for performance-based or creative-based assessments. In secondary level education, incorporate guest speakers into the curriculum. Incorporate activities from as many areas as possible to point students in direction of other opportunities, other career goals. Rather than presenting just one structure in one form, let them know there are opportunities out there. It allows them to develop and grow into their own person, their own roles. There are a lot of other applications in the classroom of Erikson. A lot of them deal with how the students are not only praised for what they do, but how we give them choices, how we encourage them to develop their personalities. Now, 3 important questions. Which of Erikson's 8 stages seems the most important, and why? What stage seems to set the tone? Well, many would jump right in and say it's your infancy stage, trust versus mistrust. Is that true, especially in the field of education? Which leads me into my second question. What are some other ways teachers can apply Erikson stages in the classroom? We listed the examples on the last slide, but how are some other methods, or what are some other methods teachers can use to utilize the psychosocial development stages to the benefit of their students? And lastly, what aspects of Erikson's theory are most important for educators to understand? By understanding how a student develops and how a student's personality forms, teachers can use this to this advantage. They can determine what motivates a student. They can determine how to better set goals and opportunities for them. As we look at these 3 questions, we understand better how Erikson's 8 stages of social development not only relate to larger life and larger opportunities and larger personality development, but especially on the level of education. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th stages are greatly impacted by teachers. And as teachers, we need to better understand how our students develop in order to help them do the best work and succeed. So these 3 questions I pose to you as the students in the class. What's most important for us to learn? Why are these important? And how can we apply them